Bigfoot vs. Vampires, written by B.Humphrey, narrated by Khai Lanner. Chapter 1. The Crimson Eclipse. The blood moon rose like a wound over the Carpathian peaks, casting a dim, rust-red glow across the ancient stone of Castle Drakmare. It was a cursed light, old and unwelcomed, one that hadn't touched the earth in over 3 centuries. Beneath its glare, the castle looked less like a stronghold and more like a mausoleum, its crooked towers clawing at the sky like the ribs of something long dead but never buried. Inside, silence reigned, not the serene hush of a sleeping place, but a silence steeped in fear, the kind that follows the slaughter of something powerful. Lord Malthius, elder of House Draven, keeper of the balance, warden of the eastern gates, lay dismembered in his inner sanctum. What remained of him was strewn in ceremonial pieces across the cold obsidian floor, each limb meticulously positioned as if arranged for a rite. His torso had been carved open, ribs cracked apart to reveal a hollow chest. His heart was missing. In its place, a black candle burned, its flame curving unnaturally as though resisting the air itself. The walls pulsed with blood runes, painted fresh in his own vitae. Glyphs of ancient power throbbed with malignant intent, a ward reversed, a prison unlocked. Something old, something terrible, had been summoned through his death. A lesser vampire stood trembling in the doorway, silver quill in hand, ink frozen on the tip. He had come to deliver a report. Instead, he stumbled upon a desecration. "Fetch the generals," he whispered, breath catching. "Now!" Far across the range, beyond ruined villages and deep frost-bitten pine, a fire burned low in a sheltered grove of the Black Forest. The flames were old, older than fire should be. They burned with a greenish hue, flickering without smoke, casting long shadows into the tree roots. Koda sat beside it, arms resting over thick knees, eyes reflecting not the flame, but the stars. The wind had changed. It no longer spoke in breezes and birdsong, but in shuddering, guttural warnings. The owls were silent. Even the wolves held their howls. He ran 2 calloused fingers through the soil beside him. It pulsed, subtle, but there. The earth itself had twitched. He closed his eyes. Something sacred has been cracked. Something bound is now bleeding. The scent came to him next. Ash and grave dust, iron and rot. It coated the wind like wet fur. It spoke of betrayal, of old magics forced awake. "The balance is shifting," he muttered aloud. "The blood moon speaks." From beneath the forest floor, he felt a stir. The old prison, deep beneath stone and forgotten crypt, had groaned. "They have opened the gate." His eyes flicked to the east, toward the place he had not spoken of in centuries. Castle Drakmare. The vampires were at it again. And this time, he feared, they had made a mistake even their ancient pride could not undo. Back within the corpse-lit halls of Drakmare, the vampire generals arrived in cloaks of midnight velvet and sigils of bone and ruby. 3 of them, Lady Adrastos of House Vex, Lady Selene of the Pale Court, and General Varos of the Crimson Host. They stood in a half-circle around Malthius's remains, their expressions unreadable. Not horror, not grief, merely calculation. "Blood runes," Adrastos said, brushing his gloved hand along the glyphs. "Summoning class, not of our houses." "It reeks of the underwrought," Selene added, sniffing delicately. "Nosferatu filth." Varos said nothing. He stared at the black candle where Malthius's heart should have been. In its flame, he saw something move. A mouth, perhaps, or the whisper of wings. "You look ill, Varos," Solen noted. He turned slowly and gave her the thinnest smile. "Just weary. The scent of old dirt offends me." But inside, his thoughts twisted like snakes. It had worked. The death had broken the seal. Soon, the Nosferatu would rise. And no longer would the balance favor the old laws. Soon the low-born guardian and his forest pacts would be ashes beneath their boots. Varos stepped back, letting the others debate. He turned his gaze to the open window, where the crimson moon still hung heavy in the sky. He whispered only to himself, "Let them come. Let them all come. We will burn the pact and salt the ashes, and when the sun forgets to rise, they will remember my name." Far below, in caverns drowned by centuries, something began to shift. Claws, ancient and cracked, scraped against stone. Hollow eyes opened in darkness. The Nosferatu, the blighted, the rot-eaters, had heard the call. They were rising. And Koda, last of the Earth Wardens, would hear their song soon enough. Chapter 2. The Bone Covenant. The sanctum of Black Marrow lay beneath the city of Aves Noctem, a vampire capital carved from a hollow mountain and lit by an eternal eclipse. The city never knew sun. Its towers were formed of petrified bone and stained glass as black as mourning veils. Bridges stretched between peaks like silk spun by spiders drunk on blood. Bats larger than hounds nested in the arches. And down below, the canals ran not with water, but the dark, clotted runoff of centuries of feasting. The sanctum was the throne chamber of the high houses, the Bone Covenant, a gathering of the oldest vampire lines. Within its cathedral-like hall, a ceiling of rib-bone arches stretched high overhead. Candles dripped wax like congealed fat. The air reeked of incense, grave rose, and old fear. Tonight, the Covenant had been summoned. Lord Adrastos of House Vex, his skin pale as a drowned noble and eyes like polished onyx, stood first. His robes were lined with scripture made from stitched skin, ancient pacts written in blood. Lady Solen, impossibly tall and waifish, glided beside him in a gown of feathered shadows, her lips a violet stain, her fingernails like needles. And General Varos, last to arrive, came robed not in grandeur, but in a cloak of red-soaked thorns. They gathered beneath the icon of the Crimson Tree, a silver sculpture forged from bones taken during the last great purge of the Nosferatu. Varos looked upon it with disdain. "He is dead," Adrastos announced, voice echoing through the dark. "Malthius is gone, torn open. The sigils speak of betrayal." Whispers filled the chamber like a tide, murmurs of rebellion, of forbidden magic. "We should not have let the forest beast live," spat Solen. "The pact was weakness, and weakness invites wolves." The name was not spoken aloud, but they all knew of whom she spoke. Koda, the last of the Earthborn. They called him a relic, a walking curse. They called his kind mongrels born of moss and marrow, guardians of a world that had passed. The vampires had long despised his presence, not for what he did, but for what he represented, a time when the earth was stronger than blood. "This is not his doing," Adrastos countered, though without conviction. "These runes were Nosferatu. You all know their language." Varos remained silent. Behind his eyes, calculations churned like storms beneath still water. Solen turned her head slightly, scenting the air like a snake. "He will come. He always does, that barefoot monstrosity. He smells the death of balance the way we smell blood." "Let him come," Varro said at last, voice low and syrupy. "He is not the guardian he once was. He's alone. His kind died out before the first binding. He is a shadow, and shadows may be scattered." A silence settled then, deeper, older. From one of the lower levels, a lesser lord stepped forward with trembling parchment. "My lords," he said, not daring to meet their eyes, "the seal beneath Drachmare is broken. The catacombs have emptied." Lady Solène inhaled sharply, her lips curling in something close to delight. "The blighted walk again," she whispered. "Rot returns to the fold." Varos turned his back to the room and walked toward the edge of the chamber where a great stained glass window overlooked the city of bone. Below, torch fires burned blue with alchemic rage, and the chants of the lesser covens echoed like haunted hymns. He stared out for a long while. "Let the Nosferatu rise. Let the old blood run in the streets. We will not stop it. We will guide it, shape it, burn the pact in flame and marrow." He did not speak the last thought aloud. "And Koda will come, and this time I will bury him beneath the weight of his oaths." Miles away, in a deep and unbroken glade, Koda moved. He did not walk like a beast, nor lope like an ape. He moved with the silence of falling leaves, the gravity of old stones. His body was massive, layered in muscle and thick, coarse fur blackened with moss and forest dust. There were no boots, no garments, only the forest, wrapped around him like an ancestral cloak. He crouched beside a creek, hand pressed to its trembling surface. The water whispered secrets, the kind only Earthborn could hear. "They are gathering," he murmured. "The ones from below." His breath misted, not from cold, from something else. The moon was wrong. The trees had begun to bleed at the roots, and even the birds had begun to mimic the cries of things that should not exist. He stood, spine straightening with a sound like roots snapping in deep soil. So be it. The Guardian was awake. The Covenant was breathing. The hunt would begin soon. Chapter 3. Nosferatu Rising. Beneath the cracked cathedral of St. Thaler, in a place the sun had never touched, the Nosferatu were waking. It began with the sound of breath, not drawn, but exhaled, a long, rasping sigh expelled from dozens of mouths that hadn't moved in centuries. The walls were lined with tombs, stacked like bones in a forgotten ossuary, their iron seals etched with symbols so ancient even vampires feared to name them. One by one, the locks snapped. The first to rise was Velk, whose body was a contradiction of famine and power. His limbs were too long, bent in unnatural curves, and his spine jutted from his back like jagged roots. His eyes, filmed over with white, did not blink as they opened. They didn't need to. He remembered everything. The betrayal, the chaining, the lies of the Covenant, the scent of moss and bark as the Earthborn drove them down, buried them under sigils and salt. And now he remembered blood. Around him, others stirred. Azika the Howler, whose mouth split back to her ears and whose tongue still bore the priest's brands. Brokel, the twice-born, who had died in fire and awoke in rot. They crawled from their crypts, bodies slick with the fluids of the dead, flesh mottled and semi-translucent. Their footsteps made no sound, not at first. Then came the shriek. Velk raised his face to the ribbed ceiling and screamed, a sound that echoed through the crypts like blades scraping bone. It did not carry through air, but through stone. The mountain heard it. So did the deep rivers. So did the forest. Miles away, Koda staggered mid-step. Not from pain, from memory. "They are awake," he said, voice low, head turned toward the east. "The ones from before language. The ones who drink shadow." He touched a tree. The bark flaked under his hand, revealing a pale welt beneath, like flesh gone sick beneath a blister. The forest remembered, too. In the lowest chamber of St. Thaler, something older than even Velk began to stir. A mass of tendrils, bone, and charred skin slowly unfolded from a pool of blood that had not dried in 1,000 years. Its name had been erased by the Covenant, but the Nosferatu remembered it. They called it the Father that Crawls. No eyes, no mouth, only hunger and command. It did not speak, but they heard it in their marrow. Rise, feast, reclaim. Velk dropped to one knee. His skin sloughed from his shoulder, revealing new sinew beneath. He hissed a vow. "We will burn their bone cities. We will drag the forest beast in chains. We will remind the world what true monsters look like." Above them, far above, the cathedral cracked. Not a collapse, a birth. Dozens of clawed hands reached up through broken tiles. The Nosferatu were no longer buried. They were coming. Chapter 4. Call of the Green Flame. The sacred grove lay hidden behind a waterfall that whispered secrets in tongues older than breath. A ring of towering oaks encircled the clearing, their trunks twisted with time. Roots gnarled and knotted like the fingers of sleeping giants. Moss clung thick to every surface, and the air shimmered with golden notes that never settled. No man had ever set foot here without being turned away, mind addled, heart lost. The grove did not welcome mankind. It welcomed guardians. It welcomed Koda. He emerged from the mist like a shadow made flesh, his enormous frame moving silently through the ferns and fallen branches. The ground bowed beneath him, not from weight alone, but from reverence. Each step he took was felt in the mycelium network, in the worm trails and water veins beneath the surface. The earth knew its son. Koda stepped into the grove barefoot, as he had always been, his thick, furred legs slick with dew. His chest rose and fell with slow gravity, each breath like the inhale of an ancient mountain. He came to the circle's center, where the grass grew in an unbroken spiral, and lowered himself to his knees. He touched the soil with the tips of his fingers. "I am here," he murmured, "and I know what has stirred." At first there was nothing. Then, from the center of the spiral, the moss withdrew. The earth split in a perfect circle, not violently, but like a mouth opening for prayer. From within the wound, flame licked upward, not red, but green, pale and luminous, flickering like bioluminescent sap. The green flame was no fire of man. It was not heat, but memory. It did not burn, it revealed. Koda leaned in. Visions poured into him. He saw the crimson tree, once hidden deep in the vampire courts, now bleeding from its roots. Its bark was peeling back like flesh. The silver leaves were curling black. From beneath it, a shadow grew. He saw Varos whispering to a great figure made of bone and shadow, an unholy exchange. An offering of Malthius's heart into a chalice wrought from skull fragments. He saw the Nosferatu swarming upward, not in chaos, but in purpose. Velk led them, but something deeper moved behind them all. A shape with no skin, only sinew and ruin. He saw a memory not his own, a time when the pacts were made. The vampires, elegant and cunning, bowed to the earthborn not out of respect, but necessity. Their cities had burned, their bloodlines cracked by infighting. It was Koda's kin who enforced the balance, his kind who made the vampires kneel. And they had never forgotten it. They had never forgiven. The vision snapped shut. The green flame hissed, twisting into a narrow tendril that reached up and touched Koda's forehead. It whispered to him, "They will raise the balance. They will open the red vein. They will awaken Varkulith." The last name made Koda's eyes narrow. He had not heard that word spoken in millennia. Not in dreams, not in death. "You lie," he growled. But the flame did not waver. The soil beneath him began to bleed. Just a trickle. Just enough to paint the roots. He rose. "Then I will walk the old paths. I will find the last mirror. I will face Varkulith again." Behind him, the grove groaned, leaves turning gray at the edges. Whatever the Nosferatu had stirred was not just war, not just vengeance. They were pulling at something older than memory, something Koda had fought once before and barely survived. He turned and stepped from the grove, and the green flame burned on behind him, brighter than before, casting a pale shadow that did not match his shape. Chapter 5. The Shattered Pact. The ruins of the Pact Temple stood like broken teeth in the maw of the forest, half swallowed by vines and loam. Centuries ago, this place had been sacred ground. Here, beneath banners stitched in moss and blood, the vampires had bent their knee before the earthborn guardians and sworn themselves to balance. It was not peace they wanted then, only survival. They had been hunted, weakened, fractured by infighting and hunted by wrathful old gods. The Earthborn gave them a path forward, under terms. Now, those terms lay in dust. Koda stepped into the shattered hall, his massive frame framed by the broken archway. Moonlight filtered down through a hole in the ceiling, casting silver over stone etched with forgotten runes. Those old symbols had once shimmered with living fire. Now they were scoured black, overwritten with something fouler. Blood glyphs, fresh. He crouched by the center altar. What had once been a slab of carved ashwood was now charged to the marrow, warped and split. A silver dagger, still slick with blood not yet clotted, rested upon it. He touched the blade. It hissed against his skin. Vampire steel. "They mock the oath," Koda murmured. His voice was like gravel rolled through fog. "They desecrate what they fear." His gaze swept the temple. Scorch marks scarred the far walls. But they hadn't come from fire. These were burns of spirit, soul scars. Something had screamed here. Something had bled old magic. And something had watched. High above, hidden in the broken rafters, a pair of vampire scouts watched Koda move. They wore black cloaks and bone-threaded armor, marked with the sigil of House Vex. They had been sent to verify the desecration. They hadn't expected him. "It's him," the smaller one whispered, trembling. "He's real. Don't look him in the eyes," hissed the other. "You remember what they told us. Don't look." But the younger one had already faltered. His gaze met Koda's from the shadowed beam, and the world tilted. A pressure bloomed in his skull. Not pain, but vertigo. His vision blurred, warped at the edges like heat over stone. He gasped, stumbling backward, and fell through the rotted beam. Koda didn't move. The scout landed hard on the temple floor, coughing blood, eyes wide and unfocused. His companion dropped next to him, blade drawn. "Stay back, forest beast," the vampire growled. Koda straightened slowly. His full height cast the vampire in shadow. His voice, when it came, was low and ancient. "You defile sacred ground. You desecrate memory. You forget your place." Then he spoke the old tongue. 3 words, spoken like thunder behind mountains. The vampire's blade shook. His glamour failed. His teeth extended against his will, eyes wide in involuntary submission. He dropped the weapon. "Stop it," he gasped. "Stop speaking that." Koda stepped forward. "You hate us not because we are beasts. You hate us because you must bow, because your pride bends when you see truth." He turned away. "Tell your master the earth remembers, and I am awake." The vampire crawled to his feet, helping his dazed companion up. They vanished into the forest before Koda could take another breath. But it was not over. Later that night, as mist coiled through the broken temple and the moon wept pale light over ruined stone, Koda stood in silence. He knelt once more at the center of the shattered spiral. He placed his palm to the altar. The ground below still whispered. He heard them stirring. The Nosferatu. The pact was broken. The war was rising. Chapter 6. War in the Veins. The ceremonial crypt of the Crimson Host was buried deeper than the city's lowest catacombs, etched into the marrow of the mountain itself. The walls were carved from volcanic redstone, veined with mineral bloodlines that glowed faintly, pulsing like arteries. Candles floated mid-air, suspended in frozen time, their flames burning blue with alchemical fire. Each flame mirrored an ancient vampire soul, and their flickering shimmered across the faces of the gathered nobles like a fever dream. They had come for answers. The death of Malthius, the breaking of the old temple, the awakening of the Nosferatu, and most disturbingly, the sighting of the earthborn guardian, Koda. His name had not been spoken aloud yet, but his presence loomed like a specter over the council. Nobles whispered behind velvet masks. Generals sharpened ceremonial blades with trembling hands. Even the elder lords, undead for over 1,000 years, spoke in hushed, brittle tones. Lord Adrastos of House Vex was the first to speak. "The sightings are confirmed. He walks the living wood." Lady Solène, pale and long-fingered, looked up from her goblet. "Then the rot is deeper than we feared. The Earthborn are not yet extinct." Another voice, younger, too eager, chimed in from the far edge of the court. A minor noble, clean robes, smooth skin, new to immortality. "This forest creature frightened you all too easily. The pact was ancient, ceremonial at best. His kind are gone. He is one thing." The room shifted. Not a word, not a breath. And then, Varos moved. The general of the Crimson Host, cloaked in blood-thorn silk and bone-forged armor, stood slowly. He had not spoken since entering. His face was unreadable. His hands were clasped behind his back like a statue. But now they moved. Before the young noble could react, Varos crossed the room in a single glide and seized him by the throat. The noble gasped. Varos held him aloft, one-handed, arm outstretched like presenting a trophy. "Ceremonial," Varos echoed, his voice a blade of ice. "Is that what you believe it was? A mere ritual for diplomacy?" He turned in a slow circle so the court could see. "We bowed to them. Did you know that? We averted our eyes. We, the great lords of night, forced to look away like whipped dogs in the dirt." The noble kicked, struggling. When he looked upon us, our blood stilled, our hearts, dead as they are, faltered. Our pride, that sacred vein of our being, cracked. Varos's voice rose now, a rasped snarl. And we called it balance. We let beasts dictate the terms of existence. He grabbed the noble's arm and ripped it clean from the socket. The screams echoed like a funeral bell. Do you know why I orchestrated Malthius's death? He tore the other arm free. Blood sprayed across the red stone floor, hissing where it touched the glowing mineral veins. Because I will never again lower my gaze. I will never again feel the heat of shame at the sight of fur and soil. He ripped the lower jaw off the screaming noble with a wet snap and tossed it across the chamber. It landed at Adrastos's feet. Then, with calm precision, Varos crushed the noble's skull between his hands. It popped like an overripe fruit. The room was deathly still. Varos let the body fall. He stepped to a nearby silver tray, took a fine cloth napkin from it, and delicately wiped his hands. He turned back to the court and smiled. Now then, he said smoothly, folding the napkin with care. About our new doctrine. The Crimson Doctrine. Varos descended the steps of the dais with calm elegance, the silence of the chamber still ringing like a chime. No one dared meet his eyes. Even Adrastos, normally unshaken, stood with his hands folded tightly, lips pursed. The Earthborn walks again, Varos said, and with him comes memory. With him comes humiliation. He clasped his hands behind his back, pacing slowly along the length of the crimson mosaic floor. He is not merely a beast. He is legacy. He is proof that we are not the apex, that something greater once made us yield. He turned, eyes flicking to each noble. That changes now. A murmuring ripple passed through the court. We have bent long enough. While we drank blood from crystal and danced beneath false stars, the old powers grew restless. The Nosferatu, the filth beneath our cathedrals, stir not in chaos but in purpose. We will give that purpose form. He stopped before a pillar carved with the sigils of the ancient truce. With one motion, he struck it with the heel of his hand. The stone cracked, sigils shattered. The pact is over, and we will write a new covenant in ash and marrow. Varos signaled to the shadows. Two servants, cloaked in mourning cloth, wheeled forward an object covered in blood-stained velvet. With a sharp flick, the cloth was removed. A cage. Inside it, barely conscious, was a vampire elder of a lesser house. A traitor who had spoken in favor of Koda's mercy centuries ago. His eyes were sewn shut, his limbs mangled. This is how we remember weakness. Varos drew a curved blade, etched in Nosferatu script. And this is how we erase it. With a single stroke, he beheaded the elder. The blood poured into the runes below the cage, which began to glow with unholy light. We will call to them, he said, voice now thunder. We will raise the Nosferatu not as our enemies, but as our weapon. He turned back to the stunned court. I promise you this. I will chain the guardian of the woods in irons made of his ancestors' bones. I will drink from his skull beneath a sky red with dawn. And when I do, none of you will need to avert your gaze ever again. The chamber erupted into a frenzy of voices, some in support, some in horror. Varos stood among it all, calm as a viper before the strike. And far below, in the catacombs where no light lived, something began to answer the call. They arrived not through doors, but through stone itself. The runes etched in blood pulsed once more, then split open like a festering wound in the floor. From it rose the stench of grave rot and old wet soil. The nobles stepped back. Even the bravest among them clutched their cloaks tighter. The first to emerge was Velk, his body warped by age and cursed evolution. His limbs were stretched like pulled taffy, his back arched in perpetual agony, or perhaps pleasure. His mouth, a gaping maw filled with mismatched fangs, curled upward as if in mockery of a smile. He was followed by Azika the Howler, whose exposed throat vibrated constantly with a sound that couldn't be heard, only felt, a psychic scream beneath the skin. Her eyes were lidless and blistered, her skin slick with decay and punctured by bone spikes. More followed. They did not walk. They slithered, twitched, staggered, crawled. The Nosferatu emissaries had arrived, and with them came the sound of 100 tiny bones cracking in rhythm. The court froze. Even Varos was still, but not out of fear. He stepped forward. "Brothers," he said, extending his arms. "Children of the deep, you honor us with your presence." Velk hissed, his tongue flickering like a serpent's. "Speak not of honor, crimson thing. We are here for hunger." Varos smiled. "Then we shall feed your hunger." Azika slinked closer, sniffing the air. Her voice was gurgled, as if speaking through a throat half-swallowed. "We want the soft ones, the fat ones. Let us eat your weak." Varos did not hesitate. He turned to the nobles and gestured to the far edge of the chamber, where several lesser vampires, lowborn and terrified, stood paralyzed. "Take them." Before the nobles could protest, the Nosferatu descended on the chosen. Teeth tore, claws raked, flesh parted. It was not war, it was feeding, and none dared intervene. Varos watched impassive. Adrastos whispered to Solène, voice trembling. "He gives them our blood." "He gives them our future," she replied, eyes locked on the carnage. When the Nosferatu finished, Velk turned back, face slick with gore. "And the Earthborn." "His bones," Varos replied, "will be yours. We will break him together." Velk grinned, a mouth too wide. "Then the pact is made anew." They bowed not to each other, but to the blood on the floor. Varos nodded, satisfied. "Begin the awakening. Call the buried. The war begins tonight." The crimson host moved like a storm. Towers of obsidian cracked open. Gates of wrought iron, carved with screaming faces, split wide to reveal legions of armor-clad vampires. Crimson banners fluttered like wounded birds in the midnight wind. From every corner of the subterranean city, the army emerged in silence. They did not shout. They did not sing. They simply moved. Above them, Varos stood atop a spire of black glass and bloodstone, watching the mobilization unfold with an expression of almost religious satisfaction. He dipped 2 fingers into the congealed remains of the noble he had slain earlier and smeared a line of blood down each cheek. Not a war paint, a covenant. Below, the Nosferatu poured out of the earth like a plague unsealed. Their numbers were impossible to count. They crawled, scampered, bounded forward on all fours. Some rode beasts that had once been wolves, now bloated and eyeless. The city shook with the thunder of movement. Varos raised one hand. The army stopped. He looked to the horizon, where the cursed woods began. Somewhere beyond those trees, Koda waited, watching, remembering. "You were their balance," he whispered. You were their chain. He clenched his fist. Now feel the weight of a world unbound. The hand fell. The army moved. And so began the war in the veins of the earth. Chapter 7. Koda Hunts. The forest was not silent. It breathed, it wept, it warned. Insects moved differently. Birds flew in jags, in sudden bursts, then vanished entirely. Trees bent toward the east, their leaves trembling without wind. The moss thickened unnaturally at the roots, and beneath the canopy, the soil had begun to darken, the rot of unnatural blood soaking into it from far-away killing fields. Koda stood at the edge of a glade, massive and still, nostrils flaring. "They've begun," he whispered. "I can taste the metal, the ash, the wrongness." His claws flexed once, digging into the earth. He had hoped for more time. By midday, he was moving. No trail, no scent, but he knew where to go. The earth beneath his feet whispered direction. The fungal webs of the forest pulsed with fresh trauma. Trees groaned with warnings as his steps thundered across sacred ground. He passed through crumbled ruins once hidden to all but the oldest of his kind. Ghostly glyphs glowed faintly as he crossed their borders. Past a drowned church, its bell half sunk in bog. Past a hollow tree filled with ancient bones, Nosferatu bones. "They're testing the perimeter," he muttered, searching, sniffing. He found the first one near dusk. It was half sunken in the swamp, crawling with leeches, but unmistakably fresh. A vampire scout, torn in two, not by beast, by claws, but not his. He knelt beside the body. The earth pulsed beneath it like a dying heart. "They fight each other. The alliance is already bleeding." But deeper in the trees, something else moved. A scent hit him, flesh-burnt, copper-slick, hollow. He turned. 2 Nosferatu crouched in the branches above, faces stretched wide with grins. They didn't move. They watched. Koda didn't speak. He didn't roar. He stepped forward slowly. They dropped together. The first moved fast, skittering low like a spider. The second leapt with its jaws wide. Koda met them both. His palm caught the leaper mid-air, and he slammed it into the trunk behind him with a crunch that shattered bark and bone. The other slashed at his side, deep gouges from obsidian claws. He turned with it still embedded in his skin, ripped it free, and hurled it into a moss-covered boulder with a wet splatter. Both lay twitching. He approached the broken one. Its lips moved. No sound, only teeth. It tried to speak in the old hunger. He placed a foot on its chest and leaned in. "I am not your prey." He drove his fist down and crushed its skull into the earth. The forest went quiet. Only the birds watched. Only the worms sang. By moonrise, he stood atop a ridge overlooking the eastern valley. In the distance, fires burned. Dozens. Too many. A host was moving. The Nosferatu crawled in the dark beneath the vampire banners. He saw them, felt them. And beneath them all, a deeper shadow moved. Something huge. Something slow. Something he had nearly forgotten. Varkalith. His voice barely carried, but the trees heard it. He turned away from the ridge. So be it. Let the hunt begin. Chapter 8. The Hollow Court. The Hollow Court did not dwell in halls of gold or polished stone. It sat entombed in a cathedral of rot and pageantry deep beneath the city. A palace carved into the skull of a godless titan from an age when time had no name. Its ceilings were ribs, vaulted and varnished, blackened with age and sacrifice. Its chandeliers were cages of knuckle bones strung with red glass, and its windows were stained not with paint, but with centuries of dried blood, pressed between glass like leaves in a book no one dared open. They called it the Crown of Bone, and tonight it pulsed with false elegance. Court was in session. Dozens of nobles stood in their finest grave silk and lacquered armor, whispering beneath veils, fans, and masks. The old houses paraded their symbols with hollow pride: bats of obsidian, spiders of ivory, serpents coiled in loops of tarnished gold. The laughter was brittle. The eyes never smiled, for they all knew what brewed outside the walls. The earth itself was shifting. The Nosferatu moved in their thousands, the crimson host readied for slaughter. Koda, the Earthborn, hunted again. And at the center of it all stood Varos, draped in a coat of stitched skin dyed redder than any wine, its buttons carved from the teeth of dissenters. He held court like a surgeon holds a scalpel, steady, patient, unflinching. He raised a chalice, a toast. "To endings," he said, "and beginnings." No one drank. He smiled and drank alone. In the alcove of shadowed columns where the lesser lords gathered, voices coiled like smoke. "He's gone too far," whispered Lord Nerrix of Hollowmoor, his mouth half hidden by a fan carved from petrified bone. "Feeding our blood to the Nosferatu. What next, our children?" "Don't speak so loudly," hissed Lady Vela, her eyes darting beneath a porcelain half-mask. "You know the walls here have tongues." "Then let them wag," Nerrix spat. "He desecrates the old ways. The pact was not merely balance, it was survival. And now, we've shackled ourselves to the old filth. To them." A new voice joined them, soft, male, smiling. "Ah, but shackles work both ways, don't they?" The pair turned. A tall figure stood just beyond the candlelight, cloaked in indigo velvet, face hidden behind a full mask of pale leather adorned with iron thorns. A single ruby sat where the right eye should be. "Who are you?" Vela demanded. "An observer, a reminder, a dealer in forgotten truths." He stepped forward and handed Nerrix a scroll, its seal formed not of wax, but of dried sinew twisted into a sunburst. Nerrix hesitated. "This is outlawed." "So is wisdom," the masked figure replied. "And yet here we are." He turned on heel and vanished through the crowd, slipping between robes and shadows like a ghost. Nerrix broke the seal. Within, written in a script older than their bloodlines, were the words, "The Earthborn were not your chains. They were your shield. Without them, you burn." He looked up and saw that Varos was watching him from across the room, smile never shifting. The serpent had seen the other snakes. Beneath the throne of the hollow court, far below the gilded steps and blood-grooved marble, there were tunnels the court had forgotten. Forgotten or chosen not to remember. Here, candlelight could not survive. The walls breathed mildew. The stone wept a slow, oily blackness. And the silence was thick. Not empty, but full. Listening. Something moved through it. Small, unseen. A creature not quite Nosferatu. Not quite vampire. Not quite anything that bore a name. Its skin was translucent and thin, stretched tight over a framework of shifting cartilage. It crawled like a spider, but it watched like a scholar. Its eyes, stitched shut, saw with memory. And it was listening. Above, in the court chamber, Varos continued to speak of conquest, of tearing down the forests, of turning Koda's bones into columns for the new palace, of burning the rivers, of boiling the roots. But below, the creature scribbled, scratched, not with ink, but with something that bled. Words, names, dates, warnings. It recorded everything, and when it was done, it scurried into the earth again, toward the north, toward the trees, toward him. That night, in one of the upper galleries of the court, a secret conclave was called. It was not sanctioned, it was not safe, but it was necessary. 7 nobles stood in a half-circle around an empty dais. Each wore a different mask: raven, wolf, thorned crown, hollow face, veiled flame. They did not speak names. They had none here. Vela was among them. So was Nerix. "So it's agreed," said the hollow face, voice low and cracked like old bark. "We can no longer let Varos lead." "His madness grows," Vela whispered. "He courts annihilation dressed as triumph." "Then we must bleed him," said the Thorned Crown, quietly, carefully, from the inside. A silence fell. Then, from the shadows behind the dais, the masked figure from the court stepped forward. "I will guide your hand," he said. "I have already set the knife." None asked how he'd gotten in. None asked what he was. But they all listened, because revolution was already in motion, and the veins of betrayal had begun to pulse. The morning after the conclave, the Hollow Court awoke to a new decoration. Lord Nerix of Hollowmore hung impaled from the ceiling of the crown of bone, suspended by his spine, which had been extracted and twisted into a helix. No blood dripped. Not because there was none, but because it had been carefully drained, painted in symbols across the ribbed ceiling above. Traitor. His mouth had been sewn open, stuffed with ashroot bark, the same sacred plant once used in ancient rites of peace. The message was not subtle. Below, the court gathered in silence, too afraid to whisper. Varos stood beneath the grotesque display, hands folded behind his back, his face serene. He did not address the court. He only looked up at the corpse and said one word. "Balance." Then he turned and walked away, and no one followed him. The day after Nerix's execution passed in dread-laced stillness, but the night that followed sang with unease. Deep in the chamber of the court's ancestral vaults, sealed beneath 7 iron doors and guarded by blood-sealed glyphs, 3 elders gathered around a slab of obsidian etched with sigils too ancient to translate. One of them, the blind archivist, ran her fingers across the grooves, feeling each memory like a scar. "It has been spoken again," she said. The others did not ask what. They already knew. Koda. The name was not uttered aloud, not in full, but it had been written, whispered, remembered, and the vault had felt it. The stone beneath them pulsed once, like a slumbering heart disturbed. Dust lifted from cracks that had not shifted in 1,000 years. One of the ancient glyphs glowed faintly, trembling at the edge of recognition. "His return has broken the silence," one elder murmured. "The balance breathes again, and it hates what we've become." The archivist leaned close, her lips trembling. "If the name is spoken again in blood, the vault will not open." The others recoiled. "Then we must bury it again," hissed the second. "We must purge it, all of it. His name, his memory, his bones." The stone beneath them cracked. A single fracture ran through the sigils. From far above, in the halls of false laughter and veiled politics, a low sound echoed through the floor. Not a voice, not a tremor, a growl. The vault had heard the name, and it would not forget. In the highest tower of the hollow court, a place abandoned by most and feared by all, an old vampire sat in silence amid the ruins of a library lost to time. The room was crumbling. Books fell apart where they stood. Ink faded in patterns that no longer held meaning. Scrolls turned to powder at the slightest breath. The air reeked of rot and candle wax. Here, beneath the fractured dome of bone and tarnished silver, sat Elric, last of the pale recorders. He had not spoken in over a century. Not because he could not, but because he had no more to say. Yet, now he stirred. His long, withered fingers moved over a leather-bound tome covered in sigils that no other living vampire dared touch. It was written in the script of the Earthborn, bound in bark and flesh. It was not meant for their kind. But he had kept it, hidden it, fed it blood every decade so it would not rot. Now it throbbed faintly beneath his hand. "He walks again," Elric murmured. His voice sounded like dried leaves crushed beneath foot. "The forest remembers." He turned a page. The ink shimmered faintly, revealing a sketch. Massive footprints, each outlined with crushed ashroot. They trailed toward the black sun drawn at the edge of the page. "I warned them," he whispered. "Balance was not a leash. It was the bone that held the spine." Outside, thunder rumbled with no storm. He stood for the first time in years, bones popping, skin tightening over brittle frame. He walked to the broken window and looked down over the vast, rotting spread of the hollow court. Torchlights flickered like dying fireflies. Banners snapped in wind that carried the scent of burning bark. He smelled Koda. He felt the forest. And he heard, faint and distant, the sound of roots pushing through stone. "You are coming, Guardian, and they are not ready." He turned, took the earthborn tome, and began descending the long, spiral stairs into the dark below. To wake the last of his kind. The ones who remembered why they had once feared the woods. The ones who had seen what Koda had done when balance was broken the first time. Beneath the hollow court, deeper even than the ancestral vaults, there lay a room no vampire had entered in 3 centuries. It was not sealed by locks or chain. It was sealed by fear. The walls were made of fossilized marrow, veined with black crystal and dripping with ancient condensation that tasted like salt and sorrow. In the center of the chamber stood a single pedestal, atop which sat the bone mirror, an artifact older than the court itself. No one carved it. No one made it. It had been found, unburied from a forgotten mountain when the hollow court was young and arrogant and foolish. The bone mirror did not reflect flesh. It reflected truth. Tonight, Varos stood before it, alone. He had ordered the chamber reopened, the glyphs re-blooded, the silence broken. The torches flickered behind him, but his reflection did not move. He looked into it. He saw a forest burning. He saw the crimson host reduced to piles of twitching limbs and scorched banners. He saw Nosferatu twisted in agony, crawling from the trees only to be dragged back by vines made of hair and bone. He saw himself, chained, bleeding, kneeling before something massive, something breathless, something that smelled of ash root and thunder. He saw Koda, but not as a beast, as a judge, as a reckoning, as the forest incarnate. And worst of all, he saw his court, his empire, bowing again. "No," Varos growled. "Never again." He turned from the mirror, but his reflection remained. It smiled, and then it vanished. Chapter 9. Blood and Bark. The forest led him there, not in a straight line, not with markers or signs, but with grief. The trees moaned when the wind passed through them, not swayed, not rustled, moaned, like lungs learning how to weep. Koda walked slow. Here, even he did not run. The canopy thickened until the moonlight was little more than a suggestion. The roots were thick and tangled, like veins around a buried heart. He had not come this way in centuries, but his body remembered. The place had no name. Names had been taken from it, scraped away by time, ash, and betrayal. But the earth still remembered, and so did the bark. At the center of the grove stood a tree so massive it blotted out the sky. Its trunk was blackened, not with rot, but with scorch marks. Charred handprints stretched up the sides, ritual markings carved by claws. Vampire claws. Koda approached it slowly, reverently. His fingers touched the bark. It bled. The sap was thick and dark, like blood infused with memory. It ran down his hand and he did not wipe it away. He knelt and listened. At first, silence. Then, screaming. Not from now, from then. The earth opened its memories to him. The grove bled images into his mind. He saw the pact formed, a ring of earthborn and vampire lords, standing around this very tree, placing hands upon bark and soil, swearing oaths beneath a full blood moon. He saw what came next. He saw Varos, younger, still fanged and furious, stepping forward when all others hesitated. He saw him cut down one of his own elders and press the body into the roots. He saw the tree reject the offering. He saw Varos light the grove aflame. The screams were not from the earthborn. They were from the trees. Koda staggered back, chest rising and falling with fury. He looked up into the blackened limbs, and they seemed to reach for him. "You remember, don't you?" he whispered. The bark split beside him, not violently, like a wound opening. Within was a skull, one of his own kind, carefully placed, preserved. Its eyes had been filled with moss. Its jaw was bound with thornvine. Koda reached out and touched the top of the skull. "I know who you were," he said, "and I know what they took." He sat beneath the tree. The sap continued to bleed around him. All night he did not move. He kept vigil, and the forest whispered to itself, because the guardian was not alone. Not anymore. By morning, the grove pulsed with energy. Birds did not sing. The insects had vanished, but the roots shifted. Koda stood, his fur wet with sap and soil. He turned toward the east, toward the fire, toward the crimson host, and without a word, he vanished into the trees. Chapter 10. The road is gone. There was no path. The roads he had once known, deer trails, root lanes, the old moss corridors that curved between sacred stones, were gone, swallowed, twisted. The forest had changed, and not on its own. Koda moved in silence through thick fog that clung low to the soil, hugging the earth like a grieving child. Every step sounded wrong. The crunch beneath his feet didn't belong to fallen leaves or twigs, but to something drier, brittle, bones. The deeper he walked, the worse it became. Roots now bulged from the ground in jagged, unnatural formations, split, charred, or infected. The trees leaned in ways that defied wind or weight. their bark pulsing in spots as if alive with a slow sickness. The vines hung limp, as if strangled in their sleep. There were no birds, no insects, even the worms had left. Koda came upon a clearing that should not have been there. He remembered this space, once a sacred place of gathering, a ring of white oaks, singing stone in the center. Now it was bare, burnt. The trees had been cut and hollowed. The stone was cracked in half, scorched with glyphs not written in any known tongue, but etched by claw and rage. Nosferatu. He knelt, brushing ash from the stone. They carve where they do not understand. They burn what they cannot control. A low rumble passed through the ground. At first he thought it was thunder, but the sky was still. The earth was weeping. He pressed both palms into the blackened dirt. His claws dug in deep, and he began to whisper, not with his voice, but with his memory. Words came not as sound, but as feeling. He spoke the old tongue, and the forest answered. From beneath the ground, roots shifted. Far away, water rippled. Trees began to sway, not with wind, but will. Come, Koda murmured into the earth. You who would hear me, come. The answer came slowly, first as a heartbeat, then a roar. Then, footsteps. 3 figures emerged from the woods at dawn. The first came from the swamplands, massive, thick-limbed, with hair matted in moss and waterweed. Its eyes burned low and gold beneath a shelf of fur. Some would have called it skunk ape, but it was older than the name, older than memory. It grunted and dropped to one knee beside Koda. The second stepped from the stone, literally from the mountain. Its skin was cracked granite, its hair trailing behind it in cords of petrified ash. It moved slowly, deliberately, as if gravity clung to it with reverence. It did not kneel. It simply nodded, and the ground hummed in response. The third walked in barefoot silence, wrapped in vines and flowers blooming even as they wilted. Androgynous, tall, with eyes like wet soil and long hair that seemed to shift with the seasons. It placed a hand on Koda's chest and whispered, We remember. Koda exhaled. Then the forest stands. They did not embrace. They did not need to. They turned together, facing east. The road was gone, but the war had found its way. And so had the Guardians. Chapter 11. The Hollow Host. They came like disease. The trees did not fall with axes. They withered. A crimson fog swept through the eastern edge of the forest, slow and thick, full of rot and breath. Where it touched bark, the wood blackened. Where it touched water, it boiled. Where it touched earth, nothing grew again. The crimson host had arrived, and with them came the Nosferatu. Varos led them at the front, mounted atop a twisted beast bred from stolen marrow and stitched with silvered bone. His armor pulsed with living runes. His eyes glowed not with light, but with absence, like something inside him had been hollowed out and filled with purpose far beyond hunger. They moved with silence, but left behind screams. Every mile they burned, every glade they trampled, every sacred tree they shattered. They nailed earthborn skulls to blackened trunks. They spilled sap as if it were blood. They laughed when the wind died. The Nosferatu devoured even the worms. Among the ranks, not all were loyal. Elric moved in shadows, cloaked in old robes and watched by whispers. He spoke to no one, but he saw everything. He counted the cracks. He watched the Nosferatu tear apart a vampire general who dared command them. He saw banners of old houses discarded, trampled, eaten. He saw fear in vampire eyes, not of Koda, of each other. The host had no heart, only hunger. And the closer they drew to the sacred core of the forest, the more that hunger became madness. Elric slipped away that night. He carried with him a blade wrapped in roots, one the old lords had forbidden, one etched with the language of the earthborn, and he whispered into the dark, "If you still walk, Koda, then walk faster." Behind him, a scream rose that was not Nosferatu, not vampire. Something in the forest screamed back. The hollow host had marched too far, and the forest was awake. Chapter 12. Forest of the Last Breath. The air changed before the land did. Where the hollow host left scorched ruin behind, this place held. Barely. The trees were still green, but their leaves trembled with exhaustion. The roots clung to the soil like dying fingers. The birds had not sung in days. The sun struggled to pierce the canopy, not because the foliage was thick, but because something beneath the forest had begun to stir. Koda moved slowly now, not from fear, not from fatigue, from reverence. He had arrived. The grove of the last seed lay ahead, a circle of trees that had stood before the pact, before the hollow court, before even the oldest earthborn had names. It was here the forest first spoke. Here the balance between predator and prey was made sacred. And here it would be defended. The three guardians walked beside him, silent. Moss-clad, the skunk ape, broad, shaggy, smelling of bog and blood. Ashwalker, the stone-skinned mountain god, quiet, deliberate, his footsteps sounding like cracking earth. The verdant one, fluid and ageless, clothed in seasons, wrapped in life and rot alike. They had answered the call, but it was not enough. Koda stepped into the center of the grove. The soil was soft. The air was thick with pollen and memory. In the very heart of the glade, a single sapling grew. No taller than a child. Its leaves shimmered. He knelt before it. "You're all that's left." His hand touched the soil. The others circled around him. Together they pressed their palms to the ground. Koda spoke the old tongue again, not to summon, to warn. "They come with fire in their eyes, with hunger in their hands. They come to tear what cannot be replaced." The earth stirred, and it listened. The hollow host moved like smoke through the wounded forest. What trees still stood leaned away from them. The fog did not welcome them. It clung, curled, tried to strangle their torches. But the host pressed forward. Nosferatu crawled ahead in vanguard packs, sniffing the roots, gnawing on bark that screamed silently beneath their claws. Their faces glistened with sap and blood. Vampire soldiers followed, armor slick with boiled bone lacquer, carrying banners of flayed wood stitched with sigils of conquest. At their center strode Varos. His feet did not touch the ground. He hovered inches above it, drawn forward by some invisible tether. His voice, when it came, was low and resonant, vibrating through the ribs of the forest. "It's here. The last breath. The last seed." He raised one gauntleted hand. "Burn it." The Nosferatu shrieked forward, but the fog did not part. It thickened. A howl rose, not lupine, not human, earthborn. The skunk ape charged from the gloom first, tearing through the line with claws like hooked bone clubs. It roared once and shattered a vampire's ribcage with a single swipe. Ashwalker followed, rising from the ground as though the forest had grown a god. He slammed his fists into the soil, and 3 Nosferatu exploded into mulch. Then came the verdant one, twisting through the air, tendrils of living vine lashing outward, pulling 2 vampires into the canopy where they did not scream long. The forest fought back. Koda arrived last. He did not roar. He walked, through the fog, into the carnage, and the host hesitated, because for the first time they saw. They were not conquerors here. They were trespassers. And the forest had teeth. The hesitation of the hollow host lasted only a breath. Then the blood began to fly. Moss-clad thundered into a squad of armored vampires, fists like mallets, claws curling under breastplates and ripping them apart like wet bark. One tried to flee. He caught it by the leg, swung it like a club into a Nosferatu, and crushed them both into paste against a tree. Ashwalker moved slower, but with the inevitability of falling stone. He stepped forward into a swarm of Nosferatu that leapt on him, screaming with hunger. His arms moved in deliberate arcs, backhanding one into splinters, grabbing another by the skull and squeezing until it popped like rotted fruit. The verdant one danced, not out of grace, but out of death's rhythm. Vines lashed from its limbs, wrapping throats, pulling vampires high into the trees and splitting them open like ripe fruit. It moved through them like decay through a crop, flowering as it killed. Blossoms bloomed from corpses as they fell. Koda was fury made flesh. He moved with no wasted motion, each strike of his claws a cleave, each step a quake. He tore the jaw from a Nosferatu mid-leap and drove its fangs into the chest of its kin. He rammed his shoulder into a vampire general, shattering ribs, lifting him from the ground and driving him back first into the trunk of a sacred tree, the wood piercing through flesh, pinning him like an insect in a display case. They screamed, but the forest was louder. Trees groaned, vines thickened, and the roots below began to move. Thorned tendrils coiled around ankles, dragged soldiers down into the earth. One vampire was half swallowed before he even finished calling for help. His last sight was of moss ceiling over his face. A pack of Nosferatu broke ranks and charged. Ashwalker met them with fury. He struck the ground. The soil fractured. Stone spears erupted upward, impaling 5 at once. Their bodies twitched for a moment, then split in half as if the forest had bitten down. 2 vampire archers took position on high branches. They never loosed a single arrow. The verdant one whispered a word in no known tongue, and the branches beneath the archers curled into claws. The trees devoured them, limbs folding in, wood groaning, bark cracking. Their bones were absorbed into the canopy. Moss-clad ripped an elite knight in half and wore the torso like a mantle for 5 brutal steps before tossing it into a bonfire of limbs. Blood soaked the roots. Screams filled the fog, and Koda, at the center of it all, stood unmoved. His eyes met Varos's across the carnage. Neither spoke, but the war had spoken for them. The moment hung like mist, thick, suspended, sacred. Koda stepped forward through the blood-soaked roots. His fur was matted with gore, his chest rising and falling slow. Around him, the guardians stood tall, breathing, bleeding, ready. Across the battlefield, the hollow host began to regroup. Nosferatu hissed. Vampires snarled behind their cracked visors. They were wounded, but not yet broken. Varos raised his sword, and Koda opened his mouth. Not to roar, to speak. The sound that followed was not of this time, not of this place. The syllables were ancient, rounded, thundered, pulled from deep beneath the crust of the world. The trees shivered, the sky dimmed. He spoke the old tongue. The earth heard it, and it answered. Roots burst from the ground in intricate patterns, spirals and sigils, vines etching glowing words across the battlefield. The very soil pulsed with rhythm, as if the planet's heart beat just beneath their feet. Nosferatu clutched their heads and screamed, not from pain, but from memory. They remembered this language, from when they were something else, something less monstrous. Vampires faltered. Some dropped to their knees. Some turned and fled. The guardians did not move. They listened, because they understood. This was not a call to war. It was a call to balance, to justice, to restore what had been shattered. The sacred tree at the grove's heart began to glow. Koda kept speaking, each word layered atop the last, building not volume, but weight. The very air bent under it. Varos raised his blade. "Enough!" he charged, but the earth rose up to meet him. A wall of bark and bone exploded from the soil, slamming into him with the force of mountains. He was hurled backward, vanishing into the fog. Koda's voice fell silent, and in the silence, the world held its breath. The balance had begun to shift. Varos did not rise at first. The fog swallowed him. For a heartbeat, the hollow host stood frozen, shocked, uncertain, afraid. Then something in the soil cracked like lightning-splitting bark. A roar from the ground. Low, primal, not Koda's, not Nosferatu. It was the forest itself, and the host finally understood. They had marched too deep. The Nosferatu broke first. Their bond to Varos had frayed even before the battle. Now, severed from their control, they turned on their vampire masters with shrieks of blind fury. Claws met armor. Fangs met flesh. Vampires began to fall. Some fought back. Others ran. Ashwalker hurled a slab of stone into the fleeing soldiers, flattening 3 in an instant. Moss-clad tackled a Nosferatu and crushed its skull underfoot before flinging its carcass at another. The verdant one raised both arms and summoned a bloom of thorned vines that shot skyward, impaling those who tried to flee through the treetops. The sacred grove glowed brighter now, light flowing from the sapling's leaves into the battlefield. Every inch of earth beneath the guardians pulsed with strength. Koda stepped forward. He found Varos crawling through mud and broken roots, bloodied but alive. His armor was cracked, his weapon gone. "You were supposed to bow," Varos rasped. "You were supposed to burn." Koda said nothing. He placed a hand on Varos's chest, and the earth surged upward, roots wrapping the vampire's limbs, thorns tightening like shackles. "You broke the pact," Koda said. "Now the forest decides." The roots tore him into the earth. There was no scream, only the sound of bark closing over bone. The rest of the host saw, and they ran, into the woods, into the dark, into a land that would never again forget what they had done. The battle was over, but the war for balance had only just begun, and the last breath of the forest now carried Koda's voice. Chapter 13. Night of the Turning Fang. The hollow court bled. Not from wounds of war, but from within. With Varos gone, silence ruled the throne room like a tyrant. No one sat on the bone dais. No one spoke from the crimson lectern. The chandeliers of knucklebone no longer swayed. They hung still, like corpses waiting for breath. But behind the stillness, a crack spread. House Vela accused House Thorn of cowardice. House Thorn blamed the Nosferatu for betrayal. The Nosferatu had no words, only teeth. The first throat was torn out during a midnight council. Lord Dren of the Southern Spire stood to object, and a Nosferatu leapt from the raptors, landing on his shoulders, biting straight through the top of his skull. The screams that followed lasted minutes, but the silence after lasted hours. Elric watched from the shadows. His eyes glowed faintly with knowledge, not fear. He had waited for this. "The fang turns inward," he whispered, "as it always does." Another body fell. A hand slapped across a pillar. Blood sprayed across the face of a veiled noblewoman, who did not flinch. She only reached for her dagger. The civil war had begun. The court collapsed in on itself, blade and fang clashing beneath sacred ribs. Fire spread through the tapestry halls. Screams echoed from the libraries and vaults. And as the vampires tore each other apart, the forest crept closer. Its roots split the stone. Its breath fogged the stained glass. And in the distance, Koda marched. The outer perimeter of the hollow court had never been breached, not by time, not by rebellion. But stone, though proud, is not immune to memory, and the forest had a long one. The first root cracked the foundation beneath the eastern wall. Quietly, patiently, like a knife through an old scar. Then came the vines, and then came Ashwalker. He stepped through the breach like a monolith carved from the old gods' breath. Stone crumbled around his frame. He did not raise a weapon. He was the weapon. The vampire guards stationed at the battlements screamed for backup. Only 3 remained to answer. The rest were already dead, buried in their posts by roots that coiled around their legs, pierced their armor, and drank their blood like water. Ashwalker did not stop. His footsteps shattered flagstones. His fists reduced the outer tower to gravel, and from the rubble behind him emerged moss-clad, roaring like a storm in the treetops. He hurled a corpse into the air so high it vanished. When it landed, it broke the iron gate clean off its hinges. The verdant one followed with no sound, only the swaying of flowers, the whisper of petals. But behind them, the air shimmered, thick with spores. They slipped beneath helmets. They bloomed inside lungs. The guards did not scream. They withered. And then, through it all, came Koda. His presence alone turned the wind. He did not speak. He raised a single claw. The roots obeyed. Stone split. Earth surged. And the hollow court, for the first time in history, felt the forest invade. The hall of sigils collapsed first. Not from flame, but from betrayal. Lady Vela drove a dagger through the heart of Lord Thorn as he turned to retreat, whispering, "For cowardice and for pride." Thorn choked on his blood, then on his fury. He died clutching her wrist, as if trying to drag her down with him. He failed. The Nosferatu howled above the rafters. They had grown wild, too wild. Unfed, unbound, they no longer responded to orders, only to instinct, to flesh. They descended like bats from hell, clawing through armor, lapping blood from torn throats. A council chamber became a pit, a feast. Elric watched it all. He did not flee, he did not fight. He walked, through fire, through fangs, through chaos. He passed fallen nobles, broken sigils, a shattered mirror of bone. He found what he had hidden, what only he remembered. A door, covered in dust. Behind it, an ancient stair. At its bottom, a room of roots. He lit a candle from memory, and he waited. Outside, the court's upper tower exploded as Ashwalker punched through it with both arms. Moss-clad charged the main gate and threw it into the grand hall like a fallen god's coin. The verdant one spread spores through every corridor, hallucinations blooming in the minds of those who still clung to logic or rule. Vampires struck down their own shadows. Nosferatu turned on each other in spasms of hunger. And through it, steady and slow, Koda climbed the spiral path, not to destroy, to meet. He entered the root chamber, and Elric did not rise. "Old friend," the vampire said, voice as dry as cracked parchment. "Even now I cannot look you in the eye without retching." Koda said nothing. His gaze softened. "You came," Elric said. "They broke the pact," Koda answered. "They always do." The vampire nodded. "But some of us remember. Some of us still believe." From the shadows behind him stepped Lady Vela, streaked in blood, face bare. "We cannot rebuild what was," she said, "but we can honor it." Koda studied her. She did not flinch. She did not look away. She bowed. "Then let this place be reborn," Elric whispered, voice cracking with time and blood. "Let a new pact be carved, not in fear, but in understanding." Lady Vela knelt. She turned not to Koda, but to the ruins of her people. "Enough!" she cried into the smoke-thick air, her voice ringing like metal through bone. "Look at what we've become!" A dozen vampires froze mid-battle, blades raised, fangs dripping. Some turned, some stared, all listened. "The Nosferatu do not bleed for us. They do not serve us. They were unleashed." She looked to Elric, whose head had slumped against the root wall, his eyes still open. "And we have forgotten who we are." A tremor passed through the floor. Not an attack, not violence. The forest was listening. She rose. "We fight not for the hollow court, not for thrones of bone and ash. We fight for balance." A silence followed. Then the first sword was lowered. Then another. Then 20 more. Vampires began to step back from the Nosferatu, not retreating, reforming. One of the Nosferatu snarled and lunged. It didn't make it far. A warhammer made of living bark caved in its skull. Moss-clad had heard the call. Koda stepped forward, towering above them all. His voice, low and deep as the roots of the earth, broke the tension. "Then let it be done." The Nosferatu howled from the lower halls, and the guardians, the vampires, and Koda turned toward them. Together. Not yet a pact, but the first strike toward one. Chapter 14. Where the Blood Fell. The entrance to the pit wasn't built. It was torn, a wound in the earth's hide, gaping and jagged, as if the land itself had once tried to purge something foul and failed. Stone hadn't been carved here. It had been peeled back, curled like the lip of a beast mid-snarl. The passage spiraled downward in a narrowing throat of obsidian and weeping shale, slick with the condensation of centuries of buried breath. The air felt wrong. It vibrated with a low, guttural hum. Not sound, but pressure. Not music, but murmur. Somewhere below, things breathed. They scraped. They writhed. Koda led them, his broad frame casting a shadow deeper than the dark itself. With every step, the earth responded. Roots trembled beneath him. The stone whispered as if remembering his presence. His fur bristled with static, and his eyes stayed forward, locked on the passage ahead. No torch, no need. Behind him came Lady Vela. Her silver cloak was gone, left draped over the broken altar above. She wore no crown, only blood across her cheek like war paint. Her fingers flexed on the hilt of her saber, and though the tremble in her hand betrayed the weight of legacy, her eyes burned clear, lit by purpose, not vengeance. What remained of the vampire court followed her. Their armor was cracked, their numbers halved, but they moved as one. These were not nobles now, not lords, not tyrants. They were defenders. Ashwalker ducked through the narrowing archway, stone flaking from the ceiling as it touched his back. His skin shifted with the rhythm of mountain breath. Slow, tectonic, unyielding. Moss-clad scraped his claws along the walls as they moved, his nose twitching at every shift in scent. Old blood, new blood, betrayal soaked into rock. The verdant one left blossoms in its wake, flowers blooming from the very rot, petals slick with cave dew and strange light. Even here, life clawed upward. None of them spoke. The descent required silence, not out of fear, but out of respect. This was a grave, and something inside still stirred. The spiral finally broke open into a cathedral of bone. The ceiling arched high and trembling, carved into the ribs of the mountain. Columns of twisted spines rose like trees, their vertebrae fused with fungal growth and trailing, pulsing veins of ancient sap. The floor was slick, a thin black film covering fossilized gristle and crushed skulls. The walls, not truly, were a living membrane, flexing and tightening like muscle around them. And in the center, rising like a cancerous idol, was the nest. It wasn't still. It breathed. A churning, heaving mound of flesh and fang and gurgling hate. Dozens of Nosferatu lay entangled together, sleeping, gnawing, birthing more. Some clawed at their own skin. Others hissed as they suckled black ichor from split sacks strung across the structure. Eyes opened. Then more. Then too many. Dozens. Then hundreds. Lids peeled back without blinking. Pupils like oil slicks on water. No light reflected back. The chamber shook as the nest reared. Then the shriek came. It wasn't a sound. It was starvation made into vibration. A physical thing. It pushed into lungs. It rattled bones. The vampires behind Vela doubled over. One retched blood. Another fell to a knee, shrieking. Koda stepped forward. His roar, deep, guttural, older than the pit, met the sound head-on, and the shriek broke. The nest moved. It didn't charge. It unfurled. Limbs spilled from its sides. Mouths bit each other in their frenzy to reach the new blood. Claws screeched across stone, and their blackened limbs carried them forward like an avalanche of hunger. Koda raised his arm. The guardians moved. Ashwalker slammed a fist into the ground and summoned a surge of stone. Jagged spikes shot up, impaling the first wave of beasts. Moss-clad let out a war cry so loud it split one Nosferatu's ears open mid-lunge before hurling himself into the mass. The verdant one spread vines like wings, thorns erupting from every crevice of the cathedral. Screams followed where petals touched flesh. Vela raised her sword. For every root they poisoned, for every throat they tore, no more. Her court roared behind her, and the battle began, not in chaos, but in perfect, bloody harmony. They met like storms, howl against roar, bone against bark. The Nosferatu swarmed from the nest in waves, some crawling, some galloping on all fours, limbs bending the wrong way, mouths gaping sideways as if torn open in birth. Their skin was stretched, translucent in patches, riddled with veins and rot. Their claws were black with centuries of damp stone and caked marrow. Moss-clad struck first, slamming a brute into the wall so hard the membrane split and screamed. Blood sprayed in ropes across the cathedral. Another Nosferatu lunged from above. Moss-clad caught it in mid-air and tore it in half, showering the ground in slick gore. He wore the rage like armor. Ashwalker moved through them like gravity unchained. With every footstep, the ground shifted. He grabbed one Nosferatu by the spine and drove it head first into a stalagmite, then kicked its twitching corpse into 3 more. The verdant one moved through the carnage like a ghost of life and death, its vines coiling, snapping, flaying flesh and turning the very cathedral into a choking garden. Petals bloomed from torn throats. One Nosferatu, impaled on a root, shrieked until flowers forced their way from its mouth. Vela fought like a woman unchained from 1,000 years of bloodline expectation. Her saber glowed faintly now, lit by something deeper. Legacy, perhaps, or memory. She carved a path through snarling limbs, severing jaws, splitting skulls. Her cord moved with her, each vampire bleeding but unbroken. They fought not for power, but for the right to exist. One vampire was pulled down, screaming, beneath a tide of bodies, her name lost in the howl. Koda roared, surged forward, and ripped 3 Nosferatu away, his claws carving clean through flesh and cartilage. He lifted the survivor in one arm and hurled her behind the line before driving his fists into the ground. The stone shattered. A shockwave surged outward. Nosferatu bodies lifted, bones snapped, and limbs flew. Koda rose through the dust, his mouth flecked with blood, his eyes black as coal and filled with silence. "Back," he growled to Vela. "Not until they're dead," she snarled, not yielding. "Then stay close." And they fought together, side by side, an Earth Guardian and a vampire general, roots and blood. The nest shifted again. The center began to rise. From its core, something bigger stirred. A primarch, perhaps, one of the original Nosferatu that the Hollow Court had once whispered about and buried in myth. Its form was taller, heavier, stitched together by bone and tendon, its face a writhing mask of fused skulls. It roared, a sound like pain incarnate. The earth pulsed. Deep beneath the cathedral of bone, at the heart of the nest, Koda stood in the ancient chamber that breathed with memory. The Primarch had drawn back from the battle above, dragging Koda with it into this deeper, darker hollow, this true womb of the Nosferatu. The 2 of them had not fallen, but descended step by step, blow by blow, into the core of what had been festering for centuries. The air was thick with spores and the stench of old blood. The chamber walls pulsed with veins as wide as tree roots. Skulls stared from every surface. Some still moved. The Primarch loomed. It was monstrous now in full. Not merely large, but impossible. Its limbs too long, fused from the skeletons of predators and kin alike. Its back curved with strain, its chest heaving with the burden of hate. Mouths opened along its ribs. Its voice was a shudder of death itself. Koda stood ready, chest still bleeding, claws still soaked. His breath came slow, heavy, grounded. The chamber quaked with their presence, and they collided. They met not in haste, but like gods going to war. Koda ducked under a claw, slashed the tendon of an arm the size of a bear's torso. The Primarch howled, swiping in a spinning arc that gouged the bone walls. Koda roared back, planting a knee into the monster's gut, then seizing it by one of its necks. He spoke the old tongue. Words not made for mouths. Words grown from root and moon and stone. the kind that carve, not speak. The Primarch shrieked. It tried to retreat up the tunnel, but roots lashed down like spears, driven by the will of the guardians above. Vines burst from the walls, from the floor, from the monster's own wounds. Still it fought. Still it tore at Koda's arms, bit at his throat. Koda sank his claws deep into the creature's chest and howled into its many faces. "You will not rise again." He drove it down with all the weight of the old world behind him, slamming its head into the stone altar at the chamber's center. The rock cracked. The ground opened. A bloom of golden green light split the darkness. The forest had arrived. It filled the air. Through the roots, the very breath of the earth poured into the chamber like a tide of life. Koda released the Primarch and stepped back. The beast twitched, limbs spasming, mouths mumbling curses in dead dialects. Then, stillness. Koda lowered his head. Above him, the war still raged. But beneath the nest, something had been broken. Something that should never have been born. And now, it was dying. Above, the battle had become a tide. The nest pulsed in its death throes, sending spasms through the bone-choked cathedral. Nosferatu shrieked in confusion, their rhythm broken, their hunger distracted. The Primarch's collapse had echoed through them. Something old and commanding had gone silent. Vela seized the moment. Her saber carved a brutal arc through a charging beast, and she screamed over the din. "Press them back! Into the pit!" Her court roared in response. Not all had survived. Many would not walk out. But now they surged forward, blades flashing, fangs bared, not as nobles or predators, but as survivors. Ashwalker threw himself into a swarm of pale creatures, flattening 3 with a single backhand swing. Moss-clad, covered in black gore, charged shoulder first into a cluster and smashed them down into the nest's base. The verdant one sang, a strange, sorrowful note. Not words, but remembrance. It echoed through the ruined walls, and the vines responded. From every crack and crevice, roots twisted down, wrapping the Nosferatu like vines in a grave. The beasts thrashed, shrieked, clawed, but were slowed, weakened. Koda rose from below. He climbed not with haste, but with weight. His arms and chest were torn. Blood matted the fur of his flank, but his presence alone sent fear back through the swarm. He didn't roar. He walked, and the Nosferatu recoiled. The last of them hissed and slashed, but they were already being buried. The roots drank deep. The bones of the cathedral cracked. The pit was closing. Lady Vela stood at its rim. "You've taken enough," she whispered. With one final breath, she threw her saber into the center of the writhing mass. The blade struck stone. A groan echoed, not of pain, but of finality, and the nest collapsed in on itself. Roots folded inward. The ground sealed, and with it, the Nosferatu were swallowed. Not destroyed, but buried. For now. Silence took the cathedral. Koda stood among the last warriors. Ashwalker slumped, breath ragged. Moss-clad sat heavily, blood drying on his fur. The verdant one knelt beside a fallen vampire, blooming flowers across her chest. Lady Vela turned to Koda. Their eyes met. She did not look away. And Koda nodded. "The roots remember," he said. "Then let them watch," she replied. Above them, the forest stirred. The balance had shifted, but it had not broken. Chapter 15. Roots of Ash branches of fire. The cathedral lay in ruin, not from defeat, but from the violence of rebirth. Where once the nest pulsed with ancient hunger, there was only earth now, sealed and still. The floor had cracked in a dozen places from the battle, and yet from those fractures, shoots of life had begun to bloom. Tiny sprouts, thin, defiant, dusted in blood and ash, pushed upward as if the ground itself had decided to heal. A hush hung heavy in the air. Not silence. Silence is emptiness. This was presence. The presence of what remains after fire. Of what returns. Lady Vela stood barefoot in the center of it all, her armor stripped down to torn cloth and leather. The blood on her hands was dry, but her fingers still trembled. She pressed them against the warm, breathing ground where the Nosferatu were buried, and whispered not a prayer, but a reckoning. This time, we listen. She did not cry for things lost. She did not kneel. She simply stood, eyes closed, and let the breath of the earth rise up through her feet. The hollow court above was unrecognizable. Its battlements had collapsed. Towers lay open like broken bones. No banners fluttered, only vines draping over cracked stone like mourning veils. Here and there, the old sigils of bloodlines were being overtaken, swallowed by creeping moss and flowering roots. The forest had entered not as conqueror, but as inheritance. Ashwalker stood vigil atop a crumbled parapet, his great stone arms crossed, unmoving as a mountain. His eyes, ancient and unreadable, watched the tree line. Moss-clad slept curled in the crook of a shattered wall, his body rising and falling with the deep rhythm of rest. Crows perched atop his shoulder without fear. The verdant one wandered alone through the wreckage, hands brushing stone and bone alike. In its wake bloomed pale, bioluminescent flowers, soft blue things that pulsed gently in the twilight. And Koda? Koda stood alone in the lower courtyard beneath the final archway that still held against time. His fur was dark with blood, his side bandaged with moss and resin. But he stood tall, eyes turned toward the wood. The wind stirred. He felt the pull of the deep forest calling to him. But still he waited. A voice joined him. Lady Vela, her hair loose and tangled, stepped beside him. She carried no blade, only her breath. "I don't know what kind of ruler I'll be," she said quietly. "You won't be one," Koda replied. She tilted her head. "You'll be a steward." She took that in, nodding slowly. "We were too proud before," she said. "Too fixed, too high. And when the rot came, we didn't notice. Or maybe we did, and we fed it." Koda didn't answer. She met his eyes. She flinched, just slightly, but she did not look away. And he nodded. He placed a claw upon the earth. From beneath, roots answered. They curled upward, slow and knowing, and formed a spiral of living wood in the center of the court. Tall, wide, braided with bark and green flame. A pillar, a symbol, a pact. Vela stepped forward. She placed her palm against the spiral. The wood glowed, not with power, but with recognition. The pact had been accepted, not through conquest, not through domination, through presence, through respect, through balance. That night, the ruins of the hollow court glowed with low firelight and moon haze. A funeral was held not for the dead, but for the old world. Ash was gathered. Bones were buried. No songs were sung, but the verdant one placed a bloom on every fallen warrior, Nosferatu and vampire alike. They had all played a part in the forest's memory. Later, at the edge where ruin met wilderness, Koda sat alone, eyes closed, breathing in the night. A voice came, dry as parchment and soft with time. You always had a way with balance, even when we hated you for it. Koda opened his eyes. Elric sat beside him, pale and thin, more memory than man now. His robes were frayed, his eyes were kind. I still can't look at you without the dizziness, Elric muttered with a half-smile. You never had to, Koda said. They sat in silence. Owls called in the trees. Fireflies danced over what had once been execution grounds. You'll watch over them? Elric asked at last. I always have. You'll come back if the pact is broken again? I never left. Elric sighed, content, and faded. At dawn, the Guardians gathered one last time, not in ceremony, but in presence. Koda stood with them, Ashwalker behind him, Verdant One beside, moss-clad looming in silence. Vela approached, no longer a ruler, but something older, something rooted. No words were exchanged, only nods, only understanding. And then the Guardians turned. One by one they walked into the trees. The woods received them. The ground softened. The air warmed. And when Koda followed, last of them all, his form began to meld into root, into shadow, into myth. Only the spiral remained, pulsing faintly beneath moss. And in the silence that followed, a new branch broke from the stone, thin, but growing. The forest does not forget. It waits, it watches, and when the blood spills again, it will remember the shape of the one who walked without sound and spoke the tongue of stone. Koda, the balance, the guardian, the story now etched in root, forever. This has been Bigfoot vs. Vampires, written by B.Humphrey, narrated by Khai Lanner. Copyright 2024-2025 by B.Humphrey. Production copyright by B.Humphrey.